I'd love to invite you all to sit and get some things on your plate and then come sit down. Thank you all for getting here on this afternoon in the middle of the week. I'm Pam Werntz. I'm the rector of Emmanuel Church, and I am thrilled to welcome Ambassador Clark to be with us, and my own suffragan bishop, Gail Harris, is with us. I'm guessing that there are people who aren't Episcopalians in this room. People who aren't Episcopalians in this room. Could you raise your hand? Good, welcome. I'm especially glad that you're here. The Mass Council of Churches represents 17 denominations, and it's always good when we can be in conversation across those denominations. So I am very happy to have you here at Emmanuel Church. This is the room where Boston Warm has been taking place. Those of you who have heard about the temporary day shelters, this is that space. And so it's been blessed over the last few months with hospitality and the gratitude of people who have really needed to come in from the snow in the middle of the day and the cold. So it's still warm, or it's warm in a different way. Bishop Harris is the president of the Mass Council of Churches, and she also is the chair of a diocesan organization committee on which I serve, called the Middle East Network and Working Group. And we have been collecting information from pilgrims and planning ongoing pilgrimages to the countries in the Middle East. And so that's the lens through which I'm interested to hear and be in conversation with you all. I'm going to turn it over to Gail, and then she's going to introduce Ambassador Clark. So thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Pam, for providing us with this wonderful space for an afternoon of conversation that is so important and vital to this world and to us, especially as followers of the God of Abraham. I hope that most of you have seen the flyer or the information that we put forward about Ambassador Clark. He is quite well-versed, experienced, and wise in the area that seems to be the center point of tension in this world. I think it's been centuries that Jerusalem, therefore the Middle East, has been called the center of the world. And that center has been fractured by crusades, by occupations, by war, and ongoing strife between Palestinian and other Arabs, as well as with Israeli Jews. Here is a place where we should be coming together in the world. Those who follow the God of Abraham, three monotheistic religions. And yet here is where we are the most deeply divided. A lot of the world's problems that we see between East and West, between Muslim and the rest of the world, center on the Palestinian conflict. And that until that is settled, other groups will rise up and cause a lot of problems for us as we seek to find justice and peace in this world. In the midst of all of that, Ambassador Clark, who's now walking out the room, to answer a call. Okay, I will just keep going. Clark has entered in as a professional and I think also as a Christian to understand the deep rifts and the deep possibilities, the opportunities, and the misunderstandings of the peoples of not only the Middle East but North Africa, which is sort of in that crescent of disruption right now. If you look at it from Morocco all the way up to Iran, there's great disruption, great conflict, and sometimes inhumane treatment of one another. And so he comes to us today not just as the director of the current agency he is with, Church for the Middle East Peace. He also comes to us as a Christian who professes his faith in his actions, in his ministry, in his work as a professional and as one who cares for the Middle East. I am honored that you are my brother in Christ, and I'm honored that you are with us. May we give a big hand and welcome to Ambassador. Oh, let me say one more thing, I'm sorry. I forgot. I'm going to ask a question for him to start off with this conversation with us. And I'm going to ask him, why is the Middle East, why has it become so important to you, a major interest of your life, and indeed of your passion? And I've asked him also to address not only why is it a passion for you, but to share your knowledge, of course, of Christians in the Middle East, especially who are facing violence now, to talk about Christian refugees. We know they're streaming from Syria, but also elsewhere across the borders of the Middle East. And what could be, or should be, the response of Christians here in the United States to help our brothers and sisters there, knowing that they're not the only people who are suffering from violence, but we have a particular kinship with them. So, again, thank you.
Bishop Gail, thank you so much for your very warm words. Thank you very much for your hospitality at Emmanuel Church. Thank you very much for the Massachusetts Council of Churches for putting this together, helping make it a day, which has really been very exciting so far, and it's going to continue. I'm really very pleased to be here and to talk to you and to respond to these very kind questions from Bishop Gale, because no one's really asked me those questions before. The Middle East has been a passion and interest of mine, sometimes by accident, but for many, many years. When I was in college, well, let's start before that. When I was in Sunday school, I was a good Episcopalian little boy, and I liked my Sunday school very much. I sang in the choir, I was a boy soprano. And that has stuck with me. You know, I can remember as a kid of 8 or 9 going with my mother. It was pitch dark, you know, on Ash Wednesday, the service. And that was kind of mysterious to me. I didn't know what it was, these candles. So that's sort of, you know, sort of gets you into the whole thing. And as many things happen with people, my church participation sort of ebbed and waned during my life. But it has coincided with the Middle East. And that's kind of where I've ended up, with these two things coming together. When I was in college, there was a crisis in the war in the Middle East in 1956. The year I graduated from college, I'm dating myself, the U.S. landed Marines in Lebanon. And about that time, when I graduated, I went to the Navy. And I ended up in Naval Air Intelligence, and I ended up on a base in Morocco. And the Sixth Fleet said, we want you to come out and brief admirals and their staff, because we don't know who the good guys and the bad guys are. You had Lebanon, you had Nasser in Egypt, you had all these people, this crazy guy over in Iraq, Qasem, and tell us what's going on. So I kind of, there's a way of educating myself. Mind you, I was 22 years old, and I thought I knew really everything there was to know, because I had read The Economist that week. Well, they had to read The Economist. And I thought, oh, this is kind of nice, you know, I like this. And maybe I'll think about joining the Foreign Service. But by the time I was 26, I knew I really didn't know very much about anything, particularly the Middle East. So I did not go into the Foreign Service. In the State Department, I went to my first graduate school. And, which is, you know, you get confused when they're at different levels. And that's been a pattern. That's been a pattern in my life. I've been to several different graduate schools, including a place up the river here at Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the last time this happened, I was retired from the Foreign Service, and I had been a consultant in Eastern Europe, and that was very interesting. But I decided that was fine, but I really enjoyed teaching Sunday school. I enjoyed, you know, Wednesday night stuff in my church, but I realized I didn't really know what I was talking about. So I went to a seminary, and I went to Virginia Theological Seminary for 2 years to sort of do basic training. And Bible study, exegesis. I studied Greek. I thought I would die. So really didn't read a little tiny bit of Greek. And that sort of got me off into the world of churches. I've been working there. I worked for the Bishop of Washington and the National Cathedral of Washington. And then this opportunity came up to work for this organization on Capitol Hill called Churches for the Peace. And that really is a coalition of 22 national church groups. You're 17, I'm 22. It includes some Christian orders. There's several Catholic orders. So you really should know something about the Middle East, but you also should be able to speak Episcopalian and other dialects of church speaking. So they said okay, and I've been doing that for the last 6.5 years, and I love it. It's great. It's challenging. It's sometimes you tear your hair. It's my goodness, can I really do all this? But it's been very, very exciting for me. It's a continuing, and it matters. I think what happens in the Middle East matters from a whole different points of view. First of all, it's a place of enormous human suffering. And as Christians, we should always be more than concerned about what we can do to alleviate human suffering. It's a place where Christians themselves have been terribly threatened, often killed, sometimes simply dispossessed. Less so in Israel, Palestine, and the Holy Land as in other countries in the Middle East, as I'm sure you know. I think over 1 million people have been displaced in Syria. Many of those are Christians. Several 100,000 Christians have fled Iraq because of the chaos in Iraq, created, I must say, in the beginning by the U.S. intervention in Iraq. And these things spill over into the Copts in Egypt. The Christians, of course, in the Middle East are a minority. And as a minority, they have looked to the dictator, whoever that was, to protect them from the majority. And when the dictator gets overthrown, then they feel that they're in jeopardy, and they are, because Copts have gotten killed in Egypt when Mubarak was overthrown. So that this creates these enormous contradictions and tensions. For example, in Syria, the United States doesn't like Assad, the dictator. But Assad has been the protector of the Christians in Syria. So, how do you balance that? There's no easy answer to any of these things. Now, what you do is you pray, and you study, and you work hard and try to learn as much as you can, and with a certain degree of humility, see if there's anything you in particular can do, or you and a group can do, or you and your church can do, to alleviate the suffering. And actually maybe even make a teeny tiny bit of progress. Let me talk a little bit about Jerusalem, the Diocese of Jerusalem, the Christians there. There are today about 50,000 Christian Palestinians in Bethlehem, Ramallah, and East Jerusalem, and other similar little villages nearby. They always laugh or gnash their teeth when people say, "Oh, when did you become Christians?" Thinking, "Oh, you must have been converted by some nice missionary back there in the 19th century." Well, you may remember that when Paul went to Damascus, he found a Christian who welcomed him and restored his sight. And he went off in the desert. He probably was off in the desert there with Christians. Indeed, they've been there since the beginning. Of course, they were maybe a majority for a while under the Byzantine Greeks, but then there were changes, and they became a minority again under the Muslims, and then later under the Ottoman Turks. But the Christians in the Middle East, like a lot of minorities, play a very important role. That is, because they're a minority, they're very sensitive to human rights, to the need for tolerance, the need for rule of law. And so they often have been very prominent, although a smaller group, they're prominent in their society. They're often very well educated. and have worked hard at reconciliation. Paul said once we have been given the vocation of reconciliation. Reconciliation with God, but also reconciliation with each other. And I don't think we can be reconciled with God unless we're reconciled with each other. So that's where it gets played out, and so that's why one reason this business of peacemaking and reconciliation is to me so terribly important. The Christians, though, in Jerusalem, have been under a lot of. They're facing a lot of problems. Since 1967, East Jerusalem and the West Bank have been under, off and on, but most of the time under military occupation by Israel. And every time there's an uprising or violence of some kind, the occupation tends to tighten down. And there have been several uprisings, what we call intifadas, during that time. And the Palestinian government that now exists in Ramallah has been cooperating very closely with Israel and with the United States on security matters and other matters in order to try to encourage negotiations with the Israelis that would lead to some sort of Palestinian state living side by side in security next to Israel, and the occupation. The occupation makes it very difficult to move around. I have met a guy in Ramallah whose son is 20 years old. He grew up in Ramallah. He has never been to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is 10 miles down the road. He can't go to Jerusalem because he's a young man. And the Israelis simply do not allow young Palestinian men to go into Jerusalem. There are times when nobody can go from the West Bank to East Jerusalem. You need, if you're a Palestinian, if you are, however, Israeli with a yellow plate on your car, you can go back and forth quite freely. And indeed, you can drive on roads that are only for people with yellow plates. So it's a very unpleasant kind of system where you have sort of not dual nationalities, but you have one group of people living under one set of laws, another group of people living under another set of laws and regulations, which are all quite different. This gets played out in many different ways. I think one thing people mention is water, which in this part of the world is terribly important. The UN says that you need to have something like 120 liters a day minimum for food and washing and so forth. I think Palestinians get something like 70 liters of water a day, and Israeli settlers get something like 300 liters of water a day. So there's a very unequal distribution of if you are the Anglican bishop of Jerusalem, you have some choices to make, which is how do you best protect your flock? How do you best look after your people? And some people, I think, like to be very political or have a very high profile. Other people are saying, no, the best thing to do is to do the best we can to help with education, to help with health, to help with housing, to do all those things to make life as livable as possible for the people under our who are part of our group, and let the politics to somebody else. The politics can get very nasty, and they can be very intractable. We have had a period now for the past 20 years, politics off and on, various attempts, most of them led by the United States, to try to get an agreement between the State of Israel and the Palestinians on some kind of what's called a two-state solution, that is creating a state of Palestine living next to Israel with security and recognized boundaries, with justice for the refugees who are left over from 1948 and 67 and ever since, and with good, adequate security measures for Israel, and some kind of sharing of Jerusalem. We'll talk about Jerusalem in a minute. This period of this pendulum swing of negotiations has come and gone. The latest one was last year, in which Secretary of State Kerry worked very hard to try to get an agreement, and was unfortunately not successful. What happens very often in the Middle East, as I was saying earlier today, that some people have said it's like a bicycle. You sort of go down like this, and if the bicycle stops, you fall over. And in the Middle East, if there's no political horizon, if people can't see where this is going, if they don't have hope that something is going to get better in the future, then it gets nasty very quickly and violence breaks out. We saw this last year with the end of the negotiations in April, and within a few months we had a terrible war in Gaza, on which thousands of people were killed, almost as a direct consequence of the failure of negotiations and the loss of a political horizon and despair on the part of a lot of people. So one of the things that I think the United States is trying to do is, and Secretary Kerry and others are trying to do, is restore some hope, restore some faith. And we'll see if there can be some horizon in which people can look at and say, well, things are pretty bad now, but if we can only get over there, things will be better. And the way that horizon has been talked about in recent months is something called a framework agreement. That is, okay, the two sides are not able to come to a full agreement, but are there sort of basic principles we can agree upon? Can we agree that we will share Jerusalem? Can we agree that the borders will be the 1967 lines plus or minus some adjustments that are agreed upon? Can we agree that the Jordan Valley can be made secure from good guys or bad things that people might try to bring into the West Bank or Palestinian state from Jordan? And is there a just resolution of the problems facing the Palestinian refugees who have been living in these refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and parts of the West Bank and Gaza, some of them for almost 40 years. So the answer is yes. The answer is, as they say, everybody knows what the solution of these issues is going to be. The problem is, nobody can get from here to there. So why not say so? Why not say these are the principles that the negotiations are going to be based upon? Well, the problem is, although Kerry tried very hard, there was no agreement between the two sides about the framework. But maybe they weren't so far apart. And indeed, from leaks we know about back in 2008, there were different negotiations back there. The two sides got quite close together on all these issues, even those sensitive issues. So Kerry has talked about putting forth a framework himself. Look, this is what Clinton did back in the year 2000. This has no standing, but I think that the deal could be based on this. And so what Kerry's thinking, he's doing the same sort of thing with his own set of frameworks, which may be based on the Clinton forever, but with some adjustments. But he hasn't been able to do it yet because of politics and because there was no agreement with the two parties. So the Europeans were much closer to the situation we are. I mean, Europe is just a couple of hours away in an airplane. Are themselves becoming increasingly impatient with the lack of any agreement. They also saw it happen last summer in Gaza. They also were horrified with what happened in Gaza, but it's happening much closer to them than it is to us. They also are Israel's major trading partner. So there's a lot of back and forth of trade, investment with Israel. And they're very concerned about the instability that really is created by, or at least exacerbated by, Israel's expansion, or expansionism, into the West Bank. That is, between 1949 and 1967, there was a very clear line, it was the armistice line, between what was Israel and what was not Israel. After the 1967 war, Israel occupied militarily all the West Bank. All of a sudden, people would go freely, back and forth. And that's when people started building Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And now there are something approaching 500,000 Israelis living east of what was the 1967 border. So, as these settlement constructions continue, you have, if you look at a map, you have Israeli settlements all over the West Bank. And it looks increasingly difficult, or indeed some people would say impossible, to have a Palestinian state that's contiguous, because it would be broken up by all these Israeli settlements. So, the United States, right from the beginning, right since 1967, has said, we don't like settlements. Please don't expand. We want an agreement, and we think that the settlements, they first said, back in the 70s, they said, settlements are illegal. Well, that changed in 1981 under Reagan, that they thought, well, settlements are, an impediment to peace. Obama has said, well, settlements are illegitimate. But they haven't said illegal. But the United States has always been opposed to the whole idea, in different words, that they were opposed to settlements. But under this government and previous Israeli government, the settlements have continued to expand. The Europeans say, and indeed I think the U.S. government says, that the settlements are becoming an enormous barrier to an agreement and a barrier to peace. And as long as these settlements continue to expand, there's going to be conflict. The problem seems to be that a lot of people are comfortable with conflict. They're comfortable with an unresolved situation. People talk about Russia and Ukraine. Russia seems happy to destabilize the eastern Ukraine without ever resolving the issue. And the Israeli government seems comfortable, or at least not uncomfortable, with continuing expanding the settlements and not ever resolving the problem of Palestinians. So the Europeans are saying, look, you've got to do it. So they're talking about introducing their own resolution into the United Nations of a framework and a timetable. Look, you need to do this and this and this, and within this kind of a framework. Now, Israel is firmly opposed to this, and the question is, what's the United States going to do? There have been a number of statements by U.S. people, government officials, including Samantha Power, our ambassador to the UN. We might not veto that resolution coming from the Europeans. That is, the United States might abstain or something like that, which means it would go ahead. Now, that in a nickel doesn't get you an agreement. There are a lot of UN resolutions out there, but nobody pays much attention to them. But it creates political pressure on Israel, on both sides, to make a deal. Now, most people, if you ask them, think that the current Israeli government, under the current Israeli Prime Minister, is not going to make a deal. He wrote a book back in the 1990s, or two books actually, the same book he wrote twice. A different title, into self-employment. In the 1990s, it's clear he's completely opposed to there ever being an Arab state, a Palestinian state, east of the, should we say, west of the Jordan River. He said that, in effect, the day before the elections last month. And I think most people thought he's always felt that. But the fact that he said it out loud the day before the elections has sort of given the United States the opportunity to say, well, you have given up on the two-state solution, so there's something we have to do, and that is, something that we have to do. Now, as I said, whether or not that's going to make any difference, I don't know, but you can imagine there's going to be a lot of strong growth about this. In the U.S. Congress, probably more in the U.S. Congress than at the United Nations. Now, this is where my organization comes in. We're not a church. we are a political advocacy. We're a education and advocacy group that tries to create political space for the president by urging Congress to do the right thing or not do the wrong thing. One of our principles in advocating with Congress is please do no harm. Okay? The old Hippocratic oath. What do we mean, do no harm? Well, every year there's a resolution or a law or an amendment to a law that comes through the Congress saying, well, the U.S. Embassy should be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Because after all, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Well, there's no agreement on Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a disputed area between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And we've always said that we're not going to move the embassy, the U.S. Embassy to Israel, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem until there's an agreement on Jerusalem. Because for the U.S. to move its embassy to Jerusalem would be recognition. This would be political, diplomatic recognition that Jerusalem is part of Israel. Well, de facto, about 4/5 of it is part of Israel, but about 1/5 is not. 1/5 is East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is still Arab, it's still Palestinian, and most people think that if there's ever going to be a peace, Jerusalem's going to have to be in some way divided. There's going to have to be an Arab East Jerusalem and a Palestinian, Israeli West Jerusalem. However, the Prime Minister has said many times that Israel is the united, eternal capital of Jerusalem is the eternal united capital of Israel. So there's no agreement on Jerusalem. But if Congress tries to move the embassy, that would make it harder for there ever to be a negotiated agreement. The second thing is coming up right now in the Congress. There's something in the jargon that's called BDS, boycott, divestiture, and sanctions. Different people have said, well, the only thing to do to encourage Israel to make a deal with Palestinians is to either boycott Israel, or divest investment in Israel, or sanction Israel. As you can imagine, some Christian groups, and almost all of the Jewish groups in the United States, think this is a terrible idea. And that you can agree or not agree with a policy, but that to penalize Israel with economic measures is not the way to do it. It's not the way to win friends and influence people and induce them to negotiate an agreement. And people also would say that anything that is done by a U.S. church is not going to have an awful lot of economic impact anyway. But the other side of that story is that BDS creates a lot of interest. It creates a lot of static. It creates a lot of people. Some people get excited about it. And all of a sudden, more people are aware of the issue. The consciousness of the issue is raised with a lot of people. And so that's why I think the advocates of BDS continue to do that. My organization is divided. Some people support elements of BDS. The Presbyterian Church last summer passed a resolution divesting from 3 U.S. companies, Motorola, Caterpillar, and one other, who are profiting from military sales to Israel for war to the West Bank. But the same resolution said, well, we don't support BDS. But that created a lot of, it was on the front page of the New York Times, the Presbyterian Church. So it raised, it made more people aware of the issue. I think the idea of sanctions against Israel is probably more important coming from Europe because their trade and investment in Europe is greater, actually, than it is with the United States. And the Europeans are becoming impatient also with black influence. So I think some of these issues are going to come up this fall in the United Nations. Let me mention, I guess I've touched upon the response of the U.S. churches. But let me just go one other thing on the church response. I think U.S. pastors, U.S. bishops, are moral leaders. And I think people listen to what they say. And they respect what they say. So that the more my organization can do to educate congregations about what's going on, to urge them to write to their congressman or their senator or the president about these various issues, to urge them to work for peace, the easier it is for the administration to try, in fact, to work towards an agreement. I think there are a lot of people in Washington who are pushing the other way. Some of them are Christians. There's a group called Christians United for Israel, which thinks that Israel should take over all of the West Bank, and that would somehow hasten the second coming of Christ. This may sound strange in Boston, Massachusetts, but it's firmly believed in many parts of this country. And these people are not without influence. They have about 1 million people on their email list. Pastor John Hagee preaches to maybe over 1 million people every Sunday morning on television. And he contributes millions of dollars to the construction of settlements in the West Bank. So this is not inconceivable. So I think the churches do have a very important moral leadership role in encouraging the U.S. government politically to do the right thing and working for an agreement. Let me stop there, perhaps, and see if there's questions or comments. Yes, please.
I have some relatives who are Druze.
Oh.
And speaking of minorities in the Middle East, this is the decade, I believe, where we did about 1,000 years since they organized themselves as distinct from Muslims who consider them heretics. And I don't know the degree of danger and assimilation and so on. Do you have any particular experience and knowledge in that area?
A little bit. I've been on the Golan Heights. There's some Jewish villages up there. I knew a guy in the Israeli Foreign Ministry who was a Druze, who was the guy in charge of relations with religious groups in Jerusalem. They are, in fact, a very important and interesting minority. There are Druze also in Syria and Lebanon.
Yes.
The Druze in Israel, many of them are citizens of Israel. They have Israeli cards, citizenship cards. Some of them serve in the army in Israel. For that reason, some of them are regarded by suspicion, I guess, by Palestinians. But I'm not aware of a lot of tension between the Jewish community in Israel and the Palestinian communities. But people know about them. And there's a wonderful movie a few years ago called The Syrian Bride about the Golan Heights. And it was wonderful because it showed you the Druze village. And it showed the traditions and the village elders and that kind of thing. And then the story was one of these ridiculous things about how this Druze woman was marrying a Syrian man, and how you could go one way through the border but not the other way through the border. And she got halfway through, and she couldn't go back, and for bureaucratic reasons she couldn't go forward. She was quoted no man's land. So it was making fun about all the political stupidities of borders and imperialism of borders in the Middle East. But it showed a nice picture of Druze life in the Golan Heights. So they're well known and respected group.
Ambassador, before I finish, Bishop Gale has asked me to remind everyone to try to keep everything focused on what we're talking about today, which is the churches in the Middle East, the Diocese of Jerusalem in particular. What about Christian refugees, particularly in Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon? And what could the response of the U.S. Church be? So if we can focus our questions kind of in that direction, I think that would be helpful. Excellent.
Good.
Yes, I have a question too, in response to what Barry just said. Our diocese actually built a 3 high-rise condo apartment buildings in Ramallah.
Oh, yeah.
It was the St. Andrew's Housing Project, and we, put a substantial amount of money as a way to do a counterpoint, I guess, to the settlements in the West Bank. But what I understand, sometimes even in the West Bank, where there are Christians who have built homes, who own property. Indeed, Bishop Dewani has had his family land taken by the Israeli government. So to respond to the needs for housing, education, medical needs, how can the church continue? Is it good for the church to continue to help in those kinds of ways, building housing, knowing that they could be taken away at any point?
Well, I think...
Or is it because it's a U.S. church that it may be safer ground for them to build?
I think because it is the U.S. church and its U.S. interest, that insulates the property to a large degree. There are a number of cases of Palestinians whose land where Israelis have tried to confiscate land, and they do frequently. But those Palestinians who have a lot of connections with America through American churches find that they're more able to resist the takeover of their land by Israeli authorities. There's a very well-known guy named Yusuf Daher who has a farm not too far from Bethlehem, and he's surrounded by settlements. And it's very clear that the people in settlements want his farmland. It's worth a lot more as a real estate development than it is as an olive grove. But he has documents going back to the Ottomans, and he has a lot of other things. And he's very vigorous in defending himself in court. And the fact that he's a Lutheran, I think, helps. And he gets a lot of support from the Lutheran Church. So he's held on to his land. So I think it can be an advantage.
That's what I needed.
Yeah.
Certainly. I understand that Arabs in Jerusalem have a very difficult situation with lack of opportunity, sort of a no-exit situation. And is this true also of Christians in some of these areas?
The Christian population in East Jerusalem on the West Bank has been fairly steady for about 50 years, while the other populations have gone up. I mean, the Israeli population, Muslim population. The reason for that is immigration. A lot of the Christian community have immigrated to Europe or to North America or even South America. And the reason for the immigration, I think, is because of lack of economic opportunities and other opportunities for young people in the West Bank who have, since 1967, been living under occupation with all kinds of barriers to economic activity and movement of people and goods and that kind of thing. Now the occupation affects everybody, Muslims and Christians. But the Christians often are better educated. Some of them have relatives in Europe or North America, so they have more opportunities to immigrate. So we think that the best way to preserve the very important to us Christian community in Jerusalem and in the West Bank is to end the occupation and create more economic and social and educational opportunities for the people who are there, so they don't have to so they don't feel they have to immigrate.
So you run an interdenominational organization, and this is a gross overgeneralization, but at least in Massachusetts we found that Protestants pass resolutions and maybe fundraise for particular purposes, but the advocacy around Christians in the Middle East tends to be more political, whereas with our Orthodox and Roman Catholic sisters and brothers, there's their expression of fidelity and solidarity is more in charitable giving, in regular prayer, but less political advocacy. As someone who works with Protestants, Orthodox Christians, Roman Catholics who are all concerned about Israel, how do you work with these various ways that we attend to a really painful situation?
That's a very interesting question, and you're phrasing it in a way I hadn't heard before, and it's really very good. The Orthodox communities in the United States, Greek, Antiochian, several others, have, should we say, co-religionists in the region. People who are also Antiochian Orthodox, who are also Greek. That's true, I think, for the Catholics. The Catholics have, there are two Catholic kind of heads of churches or patriarchs in Jerusalem. One is the Latin Patriarch, the other is the Custos of the Holy Places. And they have a lot of property, and they have schools and clinics and these other kinds of things, as does the Anglican Church. So that those groups who have co-religionists tend to focus on what I would call relief and development, on scholarships, on clinics, on building, housing, that kind of stuff. There is a group in Washington that's very active, headed by a guy named Ratted Rebbe, who focuses on schools in Jerusalem. In Bethlehem. The Holy Land Christian Ecumenical Foundation. And most of the people who contribute to his organization are Christians, Arabs, who come from the region, and who are supporting their cousins and nieces and nephews and so forth in the area. The Protestants, on the other hand, don't have so many of their co-religions. I mean, the Lutherans do have a very small congregation there, but the Presbyterians don't much, and the Methodists and so forth. So their focus tends to be more on the political side, rather than on the relief and development side. And they seem to be more willing to study BDS and more willing to get excited, get involved in politics, than do the people. There's one guy on my board who talks about historic churches in Jerusalem. That is, people who've been there for hundreds of years or thousands of years. And all those people, that is, the churches that are there, are really quite dependent on a degree of goodwill coming from the Israeli authorities. They need visas, they need residency permits, they need tax exemptions, and those can be turned on or turned off. And they have been.
Yes.
Sir Dewani having a pleasant experience with them.
Yes. And the Greek patriarch had it.
Oh, yes.
And they went out to the Romans after that.
Yes. So that the people who are there and who are invested on the ground tend to be much more cautious than the people who are not. Yes, ma'am.
I suppose this is more an observation than a question, but I'm curious to know if you kind of concur with this. And first of all, thank you for being here with us. It occurred to me as the Christians were being driven out of Mosul in recent months that I kept hearing our president talk more about Yazidis than Christians. He seemed hesitant to isolate Christian expulsion from places like Mosul and Aleppo. So I'm wondering if the word Christian sort of has a political charge for our president that the word Yazidi does not in our electorate. And I wonder if sort of part of what has us balled up as, blue states, somewhat progressive Protestants, is a sense of shame attached to military incursions in the Middle East in the past 20 years. George W. Bush's use of the word crusade.
Yes.
So I feel as if we are hamstrung as good progressives. It's safer to talk about the Yazidis than it is to talk about, I loved your word earlier, these are our kin. And I've, in my own parish, when I craft the prayers every week, I feel the compulsion to talk about every denomination and almost a hesitancy for us to be praying for Christians in other parts of the world. And I think that's part of the local culture in which I am embedded and which I serve. And I feel a cultural timidity here, perhaps in our diocese, that is hesitant to say, of course we pray for everyone. Of course we have that coexist bumper sticker on our cars. However, we have a particular kindred relationship with these people. And, to hear about how Christians are being expelled from Mosul, with that character painted on their lintel posts, the choice of expulsion, death, or conversion, is Berlin 1939. And I use Holocaust metaphors. I usually hate when people use them because they desecrate the memory of that time. But the tactics in Mosul that ISIS is using are a page out of that book. So I'm just wondering what you make of that. As I've been praying and thinking about this, the word timidity comes to mind. And sort of, I think shame can hamstring us sometimes. And I'm wondering if that's not the case here.
Well, you're full of many insights into the problem. I was out in Detroit, Michigan a couple years ago. Wow, that's a very different situation. You have Maronites. You have a whole host of Middle Eastern Christian groups. And they are very deeply concerned with what's going on with their kin, their co-religionists in Syria and Iraq. And they're doing whatever they can to get them out or to help them in various ways. And it's interesting, though, that their focus has been more on helping them get out and relief and development than it has been on political lobbying in Washington. I think, whether it's they think they can't get very far in Washington, but I mentioned earlier the tension between the U.S. government, which is anti-Assad in Syria, and the Christian groups who are, in a funny way, pro-Assad because he's protecting the Christians in Aleppo and other parts of Syria. So they feel very, very caught in the bind. As a result, they don't do a lot of politicking in Washington, but they do a lot of relief and development to the degree they can for the people who are trying to help on the ground. But it's a desperate situation, and I haven't followed the Yazidis and other people like that so much, except to see the numbers, which are just appalling. In the hundreds of thousands in Iraq who have fled or been killed. It's just a ghastly situation. And as I mentioned, it's more or less a product of the U.S. intervention. And you're talking about unintended consequences of policies. It's a very sad situation. You want to?
You characterize the response of the various Christian denominations in this country vis-a-vis the Middle East as tempered in large measure by how many of their brethren are over there, and do they have a political interest or economic interest or whatever. Characterize, if there is such one, characterize the position of our National Episcopal Church. What is the national church, our church, vis-a-vis the Holy Land, and is anything going to come up in Salt Lake City that's going to alter that?
Well, I'm sure it will come up in Salt Lake City. The Episcopal Church is divided, as many churches are. The Episcopal Church has many very active groups. The one in Chicago called PIN, Palestine Israel Network, headed by a guy named Carlton-Foss, who I know. And he's strong on BDS, he's strong on doing things and activism. The National Episcopal Church, Bishop Catherine and others are very much opposed to BDS. Now, I understand she's retiring this year, and there'll be an election this summer. So I have no idea what will happen after that. But the Episcopal representative on my board is very firm in opposing anything that's related to BDS. I would also say.
Get me on your board.
I'm sorry?
Get me on your board.
Yes, please.
The resolution.
you know, let me swing back and to address the same thing in a different way. This morning, we had a very interesting dialogue with the American Jewish community. And these are really fine people, and they're very helpful people, rabbis and others. And I think Americans in general, including Episcopalians, don't have enough contact with their friendly Jewish neighbors and their Jewish rabbi colleagues. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you come up with a different policy, but I think a lot of times some Christians are maybe insensitive or maybe don't understand kind of where many of the Jewish people their sensitivities are. Supersessionism is only one of those. So I think there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot I'm learning that I've learned today from this subject of which there really are no really easy answers.
Just one point I'd like to bring up. Bishop Dewani has come to the House of Bishops meeting every other year, and he's been at general conventions generally, and has given testimony about the situation there as a Christian, and resolutions have come before the House of Bishops as well as for the general convention. And it's interesting that the voices that spoke them down, that would water down the language, haven't been bishops that I know who regularly go over to the Holy Land, but they're led by Israeli Jews on their pilgrimages. In the case of one, this supposed Roman Catholic sister was leading a group, and I went over in May, and this woman, just after going to worship at St. George's with Palestinians and us and others, when they came out, said, these people don't really believe, they're just here for the handout. Saying that of Palestinian Christians. And
she said that?
Yes, she did. And did you not hear this?
Yeah.
And so I also wonder that since these trips are free, if they're not being underwritten by the Israeli government, so I guess my question is, or some agency of the Israeli government, is there a relationship between the more evangelical, conservative, we're waiting for Jesus to come back, Christians, and the Israeli government that makes them complicit in this? Are you aware of that?
Well, you touched on a very important point, which is the financing of all this stuff. There are enormous amount of trips and travel going on all the time that are financed by people you never quite see. But there is a program called Birthright, which last time I heard had an annual budget of $25 million for travel for U.S. Jewish teenagers to spend 10 days in Israel. By the way, don't you want to meet a nice Jewish girl? I mean, the idea was to show them how wonderful Israel is, and it is a wonderful place. It's also to promote romance, I think, frankly, between Jewish boys and girls, because of their concern about assimilation. There's also concern about what I just mentioned, the demographic balance, and they want more American Jews or more European Jews to emigrate to Israel. There's an enormous amount of money behind this. It's just from various groups. Just as there's an enormous amount of money behind AIPAC. I was talking earlier about budgets. My budget is, I'll be very frank about this, $250,000 a year. That's 2 full-time people, rent, utilities, everything, including trips. AIPAC, there's a very good, a liberal Jewish group in Washington called J Street. They have, last time I looked, their annual budget was $7 million a year. Okay, that's 20 times my budget. AIPAC's budget is 10 times that budget. It's $17 million. So there's huge amounts of money. And that's not for political contributions. That's for advocacy. And that includes education. And education includes travel. So every congressman is almost automatically offered a free trip. Now, on these free trips, you see who people want you to see. You see nothing but nice, friendly, healthy, hardworking people in Israel. And you get to meet important people like the Prime Minister and other people you've heard about. You don't see many Palestinians. You may not ever get to the West Bank. I was talking to a U.S. congressman who comes from a district with a big Jewish percentage of his constituents, but he's not Jewish. He's Greek Orthodox. And so he was on one of these nice, small, expensive paid trips. And he said, well, here I am in Jerusalem. I want to go see the Greek Orthodox patriarch. Oh, we're terribly sorry, but, you know, there's a very busy schedule, and we've got to see this person and that person, and there's just no time to go see the Greek Orthodox.
Who's the Palestinian?
So he's the Greek Orthodox Palestinian. So the congressman said, well, you know, we just had Shabbat, your day of rest. Sunday is my day of rest. So I'm going to take Sunday off from the tour. Oh, well, they couldn't argue with that. He was going to take Sunday off. So, of course, he went to see the Greek patriarch. And the Greek patriarch greeted him with, you know, dozens of priests and nuns and people, you know, singing and dancing and offering a big feast. So, you know, it's a rough and tumble game. We organize a trip every year with members of my board and other people who want to come. We try to make it economical, but we call it a dual narrative tour. We try very hard to meet both with Israeli officials and with Palestinian officials, and to hear both sides of the story. I work closely with the Israeli embassy in Washington on the itinerary, as well as with the PLO ambassador. I think we're one of the few groups that organizes trips. That first of all, we pay for it ourselves, but secondly, that we try to hear both sides of the story. And it's difficult because most people only want to hear one side of the story, only one narrative.
I think you've just about answered my question, which was about your organization's relationship with the Palestinian groups and the overwhelming power of the Israelis in just taking over, we call it the occupation of Israel. In other words, sounds almost a dichotomy.
Yeah, you know, George Romney made a slip when he was a presidential candidate, talking about the relative income of people in Israel and the West Bank. It's more than 10. Israel, per capita income in the West Bank is $1,800 a year. Per capita income in Israel is $28,000. So that's about 15 times more. So the disparity between Israel, which is just a miracle, and the West Bank is quite extraordinary. You can see it if you're going from Jerusalem, from West Jerusalem to East Jerusalem, you can see it like that. Mm-hmm. You're going from a first world country to a third world country. You're going to places where the streets are very clean, people are well dressed, to places where the streets are not very clean, and people are not very well dressed. With great food, so
Oh, yes.
But the economic disparities are quite extraordinary. And, you know, this is one of the tragedies of the situation. Israel would be so much better off. I study economics, but a lot of my background is in economics. Israel would be so much better off if they could ever find their way to make a deal. Because Palestine, the West Bank, is not going to be an autarky. They can't exist independently. They can't have their own currency. They can't have their own economic or commercial policy. They're going to be part of Israel's economic orbit, whether or not they have the same currency or not. I lived in Luxembourg. Hey, you know, okay, Luxembourg is an independent country, but they've been in a monetary union with Belgium, you know, since 1920, and they've been in a commercial union with Benelux, you know, since I don't know before that. So you can be independent and you can have a seat in the United Nations and still be part of, you know, an economic, commercial, financial zone. And you know, the capital-intensive stuff in Israel is a perfect complement to the labor-intensive stuff in the West Bank, and they could both benefit from each other if they could only agree to stop fighting.
Sarah?
I grew up in a church where every week we prayed for peace in the Middle East. And I'm just wondering, are there specific things we should be praying for? Because instead of, praying for peace in the Middle East, for me that just seems too generic. What is it that we should be praying for?
Well, in a generic way, the first thing that comes to my mind is patience and persistence, humility, and a strong desire to try to understand a complicated situation. The second thing I would pray for is concern for those who are suffering, and people are dying every week, sometimes every day, in these conflicts, more than anybody knows. Gaza is a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. Somebody estimated it was going to cost $1.6 billion to rebuild what was damaged last summer. Almost none of that has happened. People are still living in temporary shelters. It's just a terrible situation. And I would urge everybody not to be too confident that you know or understand or have the right answer. It's very difficult to come up with the right answer. And I think anybody who works with this issue needs to have some humility while working hard, while doing everything you can to try to help out. And when you find something specific, an apartment building in Ramallah, or I sponsor a little girl in a school in Bethlehem. It doesn't cost me very much, and it's really more symbolic than anything else, but I go and see her, And when you go to the Middle East, go and visit the Christians and visit with them. That's what we have several asks as members of Congress. And one of them is, go talk to the Christians, go meet the Christians. First of all, know they exist, and then go talk to them. Because it's too easy we all abstract very quickly. Somebody said abstraction is the root of all evil, because people aren't human, they become an abstraction. And then terrible things start happening. If you can make it personal, then that reduces the risk of terrible things.
One more question about the Palestinian movement, the hatred that exists.
Louder, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
A question about the hatred that exists between the people. And can the Christian church do anything to intervene on that hatred?
I'm afraid you're touching on something very important, which is there is a lot of very, very bad feeling that people have felt dispossessed, they felt treated unfairly, and people don't always take that with equanimity. They resent it. They're angry about it. And sometimes that anger is carried out in good and righteous ways, and sometimes it's carried out in terrible ways and violent ways. So yes, there's a lot of anger, I think, on both sides, but particularly on the Palestinian side because they feel oppressed. But I think that's not the end of the story. Hope is a good Christian virtue, but I have more than hope about this issue. I think that the status quo is so untenable that sooner or later there's going to be a government in Israel that's going to have to say, okay, let's stop this craziness. Let's make a deal. And when that happens, and if things get better, I think human beings are resilient. We bounce back, and I think along with the anger, there's a lot of willingness to cooperate between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and indeed an admiration and desire to work for an Israeli entrepreneur because he might pay you well, and if you're willing to get a good job that pays well, you hope that it doesn't matter if the entrepreneurs in Israel.
That's not the governments. That's
but the governments can create the conditions. Governments create the environment, the political environment, the economic environment, and the governments are not helping right now.
In talking about supersessionism, the material that I've read, I find somewhat befuddling and difficult to sort out when I look at what comes out of Russian Orthodoxy in Russia and among some other Orthodox churches. And what I find, what's more familiar here in the West. And I don't know the extent to which that might be because people really have different views, and how much it's because maybe I'm reading stuff from people that are just off the wall. I don't know. But when I look at it, I thought I understood it all. Because I've been reading some different sources. But when I read the Russian stuff, they said, "Oh, our bishops aren't anti-Semitic, and this isn't the supersessionism, but they can't say it because then they'll be accused of being anti-Semitic."
I confess I don't know much about the Russian Orthodox Church or their responses to anti-Semitism. One of the things, though, that I've sort of figured out, or it's come to my realization, is that Americans and people in Western Europe, but particularly Americans, tend to look upon issues from the point of view of individuals. What do I think about something? How has this affected me or my immediate family? And I think other groups, and maybe most other groups, don't think that way. They think in terms of groups. How is this affecting my group? I think the Russians are very much that way. I read a criticism. There's a columnist called David Brooke, who writes in New York Times, very often on morality.
He's on NPR every day.
And he just wrote a book about virtue. He talked about not the job description, but your CV, all the great things you've done in your life. And then he's talking about you comparing that with what people say at your eulogy when you're dead. So he talks about the CV virtues and the eulogy virtues, okay?
Yeah.
And he's trying to make you think about the eulogy virtues. How are you doing with your personal relationships, and how are you doing with your charitableness, and how are you doing with your tolerance, and things like that. And this review was critical of David Brooks because he's Jewish. And he seemed to be talking about individuals and individuals' efforts to find merit, whereas he wasn't talking about the group. He wasn't talking about the group's desire for justice or for righteousness. And it struck me about how different people look upon things differently. And some people said, we invaded Iraq with the belief that once Saddam Hussein was gone, people would say, this is great, now we can vote for our political parties and have an election. No, people didn't want to care about what they thought. All they thought about was their group. I'm a Sunni, I'm a Shia, I'm a Druze, whatever it is. And what's good for my group, not what's good for me. Because it's from your group that you get your rewards and you get your security and you get these kinds of things. I think the Russians are a little bit on the group end of things. And it's very different from sort of the Protestant view of how you go about dealing with issues.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to press you a little bit more, if I can, on the BDS movement. And the Episcopal Church is divided, and you said your board was divided. How has your own thinking changed about this during your work?
Yeah.
And would you be willing to say where you are personally?
Sure.
But you can't. It's okay.
Yeah, sure enough. Well, I think I started out with a point of view that it probably wasn't going to have a big economic impact on the shares of Lockheed Martin or Caterpillar. So I thought it was thought maybe not very effective that way. But then I was aware that it was very effective politically, and that it raised the issue, made people much more aware of the issue. And part of my job is trying to make people aware of the issue, because a lot of people don't know or don't care much. So from that point of view, it was good in raising the issue. On the other hand, it makes some people, Jewish people, very angry. And it's very hard. Some people won't speak to you. They won't deal with you. If you need their cooperation, they won't cooperate with you. So I think one has to be very careful about what one says and the context in which it's said and the words that are chosen. If it's important, if your relationship with Jewish people or Jewish groups are as important to you, and it's important to me because I deal with Jewish groups all the time. So I feel I need to be prudent about talking about EDS. I see you find me using weasel words. I'm willing to do anything to raise I think the issue is very important, and I'm willing to do anything to raise up the issue and make people more aware of the suffering that's going on. And if the opportunity is there, my goodness, the upward opportunity of reconciliation is enormous. And everybody could be better off, including U.S. security, including Israeli security. I'm convinced Israel would be better off if they would make a deal with the Palestinians. Everybody would say hooray, and that's what we rush in. And I think it'd be very, very positive. And in that picture, I'm not sure BDS it weighs a lot in that equation, with one exception. And that is the Europeans. Maybe I mentioned this earlier, but Israel trades investment much more with Europe than with the United States. And the Europeans are becoming impatient with Israel. And they're talking about BDS a lot more. And what they talk about is not sort of large, vague things, especially disinvestment, but regulations. They're good bureaucrats. And the latest thing they're talking about is labeling products that are made in the West Bank coming into Europe to distinguish them from Israel. And that's being fought in the U.S. Congress, incidentally. And that, I think, could be quite... there's a very strong moral element to that. If an individual or a church or a government says, I want to be very clear here that this is okay and that's not okay.
SodaStream is an example.
And SodaStream, yeah. And it carries with it a very powerful, I think, message. And Europeans are doing that, or beginning to do that. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but there was a big project, a big European project last year called Europe 2020, in which the Europeans are going to invest 8 billion euros in scientific research, some of which is going to go to Israel. And the Europeans attached a rider to it, saying none of that money could be used for any project east of the 67 lines. Well, Netanyahu protested strong and drum, but in the end, the business community went to Netanyahu and said, look, we need this deal, we want this money. We've got to be part of this research effort. It's part of, Israel is a very high-tech place. It's cutting edge. You have to keep there at the cutting edge. And we can't fall behind in this area. He gave in. With protests and everything, but he gave in. So I think in those cases, you can't have, that are rather narrowly targeted, focused. You can't have a positive.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just wanted to go back a little bit to your question about the seeing the other, if you will. I'm on the board of directors of the International Board of Directors of Kids for Peace, which is an interfaith organization, which Bishop Duwani was instrumental in helping us start. And at the beginning, it brings Arab Christian, Arab Muslim, and Israeli Jewish young people together to learn about each other. And when we began the organization, we said, we're not going to bring up the conflict, it's too big an issue to deal with. But what we're finding is we've created a program that right now is from 6th grade to 12, and we're hoping to grow to 25, is that we have to move into the conflict. And we're finding that there is a great desire, once these young people get to know each other, and have those discussions and have them deeply, that their parents also want to have these deeply. And one of our folks just wrote a very interesting thing about holding, this was a Jewish Israeli man, how can we hold these two images in our minds in the same room, where my day of independence is your Nakba? And how do we have those powerful conversations?
I think this is terribly important and terribly valuable. And what you're talking about is bottom-up stuff.
Yes.
What I've been talking about mostly is top-down
Right.
stuff.
We're,
And it's not going to work unless there's bottom-up stuff.
Yeah.
Too. And there are a lot of very, very good groups that are doing that kind of person-to-person thing. You may be aware of the Parent Circle, which is a very powerful organization. I'm sure you know about it. Parents who have lost children to the conflict, Israeli and Palestinian. And instead of creating resentment and hatred between them, it creates grief and a desire for reconciliation so that it doesn't happen to other people. And you have a Palestinian and Israeli who go around together telling their stories about how their mutual tragedy has brought them together to ask, talk to military groups, talk to other people about the terrible consequences of this violence.
It sounds as though it may be that, well, we have lots of pairing of churches in Boston and perhaps around the country. And you mentioned there's some of that in relation to Israel-Palestine and maybe other Arab countries as well. What if there were a systematic effort to connect in that way U.S. parishes or churches with every one of these?
I think it's a great idea. I'm going to excuse myself just a second.
Well, to that end,
This is the infomercial
for
portion.
our Diocese of the Middle East Network and Working Group are beginning to do that. Matter of fact, where's Manny? There's Manny. Manny and Debbie Phelps and I take groups over every year from our diocese to support the Diocese of Jerusalem. And one of the things this group that Laura and Jack are also part of is trying to connect congregation to congregation. And Manny's congregation may be the first sort of real connection. His church is St. Peter's by the Sea in Beverly, and the Diocese of Jerusalem is just opening or reopening St. Peter's by the Sea in Jaffa. And so we're going to try this will be sort of our pilot program, we hope, so that we can get other parishes to adopt congregations, as well as the institutions in the Diocese of Jerusalem. This is a big goal for us, because then you have person-to-person stories and contact, as well as supporting the Christians who are doing all kinds of wonderful things, but on a nickel or a penny even, or half a penny. Would you say?
And of course, the Americans are going to write to their congressmen and their senators and make sure that Congress understands what the situation is there.
We can do that.
No,
But I think it's not an either or. I think it's a both and.
It's when you actually know a person that you start to care about that person. No one fights for justice for someone that they don't care about. And what we're hoping is that through these personal relationships and accompaniment, that people are drawn to care enough to fight for that justice, to write those letters, to march, whatever it is that needs to be done.
So one of the things that the Massachusetts Council of Churches is doing is recognizing that there's a divide between Protestants who express our solidarity with Christians in the Middle East in a certain way, but we tend not to actually know Christians from the Middle East who live here in Massachusetts. So, for the past 4 years, every January 5th and 6th, we take a delegation of Protestant and Roman Catholic pastors to go to Armenian Christmas Eve and Armenian Christmas Day services to get to know some of the Armenian Christians who are here in Massachusetts. Similarly, next Thursday is the Vespers service for the Feast of St. Mark which will be at the Coptic Orthodox Church in Natick. There behind the Natick Mall, or right next to it, off of Route 9, is a community of Coptic Christians who are feeling utterly beleaguered and separated from the wider church. And so we are going to bring an awkward group of Protestants and Roman Catholics who have never been to a Coptic service before and don't know how to pray in that tradition, and we're going to be there to be in solidarity with Christians from this part of the world that are just feeling so utterly isolated.
And being persecuted. I mean, the Egyptians, Christians that were killed were Coptics.
That's right.
We need
That's
to
right.
stand
Are this wheelchair accessible?
Not this parish, which we are going to as guests.
where they're getting.
When is it?
It's
What-
next
what-
Thursday.
Next Thursday?
Next Thursday. So, do you want to?
Laura.
Yes, Laura's finishing up.
Laura? Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Laura Walton. I work for the diocese as the director of global mission, but it's my pleasure to spend my free time with people like Bishop Gail and Manny and Debbie and Pam doing this kind of work, where we can talk, we learn, and we were blessed with the presence of the ambassador today. And I want to thank you for your presentation, for so thoughtfully answering our questions, and just for sharing your insight and your experience. We, I'm sure, all appreciate your being here on a very busy schedule. I also want to thank Pam and her staff here at Emmanuel for making this place available to us and doing such a great job with the setup. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for being here, for coming, and for all of your questions, and for caring. And I would love to invite you to learn more about what we're doing in the diocese. There's some information on the table, and please do take it. As you leave, please be sure to sign in if you haven't already, because we want to be able to let you know about other interesting, wonderful things like this.
And there are actually two sign-in forms, one for the diocesan newsletter and one for Churches for Middle East people.
Okay, then sign twice. And last but not least, I want to thank Laura Everett for bringing the ambassador to us. Because